You're listening to Beast Over Burden, powered by Barbell Logic.
We're Nikki and Andrew, your personal professional coaches.
We help you take control of your fitness through hard but doable training and nutrition practices that fit your busy life.
Build a stronger, healthier version of yourself with lifelong habits. Hello, Beasts. Happy Tuesday. I'm your host, Nikki Sims. With me is Andrew Jackson. Welcome to Beast Over Burden, powered by Barbell Logic. It's good to have you back. We are starting a new series today. We're excited. Thank you so much for listening to the previous one we just wrapped up on nutrition. We imagine you have some burning questions on your end about the actual physical part of physical freedom. So we are going to talk a lot about that, address questions about how to do it, what trade-offs you're going to have to make, what you're going to run into, how to navigate the real life actually training when you have families and other things you want to do and real life stress, because it takes some coordination. But Andrew, you were listening to one of your favorite podcasts recently, and amazingly, not at all related to fitness very much.
The All In Pod. Yep,
Yeah.
highly recommend. They were doing a science corner at the end of the last episode.
It's a great part of that podcast.
On GLP-1 inhibitors, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got one guy, David Freeberg, who's the uber nerd. I mean, these guys are all nerds.
Yeah.
They're all Silicon Valley nerds. And he is the nerdiest of them. He was talking about the trade-offs of GLP-1 inhibitors, Wegovy, popular one, Ozempic.
Right.
Yeah. And they were talking about whether or not they would do it themselves, because he rattled off a bunch of benefits, not just as it's commonly and popularly used now for weight loss, but there's also apparently some inflammation reduction and other side benefits besides inhibiting your appetite, essentially. However, there are trade-offs in that because they're in a calorie deficit, I believe, lose muscle mass and bone density, to which he was saying you have to counteract that side effect with eating more protein and lifting more weights.
You don't say.
So it opened up this conversation that when asked, would you do it, or would you consider doing it, or would you suggest your wife do it, was one of their questions, or your kids, things like this. His response, David Freeberg's response, was, I would consider it, but first I would try eating more protein and lifting more weights.
Love this.
And I just need to figure out how to get it into my schedule, because my schedule's crazy right now. And one of the other hosts, Chamath Palihapitiya, who started with Facebook and then went on to become a venture capitalist, he pointed out that he sees and hears all these protocols, which I'm sure you've picked up on as well, and I'm sure our listeners have. If you listen to Andrew Huberman or whatever health influencer, there's a million of them out there, and they all have these insanely complicated protocols that are all slight variations of each other.
Yeah.
And they probably all have some merit to them, but that the cognitive load of trying to keep up with both the diet and the workout recommendations is overwhelming. And they're all busy professionals with families and kids and podcasts, and they're celebrities in their own right within the tech world, that they don't have time to do what feels like this huge laundry list of supplements and exercises and morning routines.
Should I get a coach? What do I need in a coach? Like, do I need to get an ice bath?
And Chamath was even mentioning he had two doctors, one in San Francisco, one in LA, and they were both giving him sometimes conflicting advice. And he's just like, I just want somebody to tell me what to do so that I can just go do it. And I think that would be my goal for this series on the fitness side. I think we did a version of that on the nutrition side. But just like nutrition and the strength side is similar, there are some principles that we can be very, I think, relatively prescriptive about, just like we were with protein, fiber, macros. But then as you get down to the individual level and the more advanced your training gets, the more specific and kind of customized it gets.
Yeah.
But I think that there are principles we've learned over the decades of training and coaching that we can share with people, so that not only can they be productive with their time in the gym, but they can feel physically free as well. And to me, that means that they can know, this was another phrase Chamath used, I just want to know what's going to be the biggest bang for my buck.
Yep.
Right. There's a million things that we can go do. We can spend 10 hours a day at the gym refining every last little detail, but I got 30 to 60 minutes. And I think that's common for most people.
All right.
So what do we do?
I definitely relate to that feeling. It doesn't always come from something fitness related, but they talk a lot about investing. And it's this kind of loop you go through of getting curious about something. Then you believe you should be doing this. You're like, all right, I'm convinced. And then you have this burden of trying to figure it out. And it becomes this stress that never existed. And all of a sudden, it's a stress.
That's exactly what Chamath described. He's like, I listened to an episode of Andrew Huberman. My first response is, well, my dad died of poor health. My uncle died of poor health. I don't want to die of poor health. These guys say this is what I need to do. So I go and open up an Amazon shopping cart and I fill out the 40 supplements.
Yeah.
Because, it's a few $100s, which is to this guy, a billionaire, no big deal.
It's fine. Mm-hmm.
But then he starts feeling like, what the heck? Now I'm popping 200 pills a month.
Which is not even training. Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't even gotten to the stress side, but he's still, and then they are all this, somebody says, do a weighted vest, do kettlebells, do barbells, do machines, do this,
Right.
do spin.
And the reason those are so popular, or, there are many, but one that comes to mind for me is when you think of a dish that you love eating and a chef wants to share how to make that dish. He wants to share that with you. That chef probably doesn't have it all super articulated, teaspoon by teaspoon, size of each cut. Some chefs do because that's how they chef. But they have to take it from something that comes out of them with a lot of their own history, their kind of innate knowledge at this point, and then they have to translate into something prescriptive, and it turns into a recipe that you can make that recipe 6 different times, and it'll turn out 6 different ways. And similar to training, like these protocols are distillations of behaviors and actions that must occur, and they need to become repeatable in some medium, like a book or an Instagram page or an app that you download that works for most people. But over time, that recipe does have to change for the person and for the circumstances around them. And so it's really overwhelming because there are so many voices. I mean, we're a voice. We have a voice in the fitness world where we're trying to share what we believe is really, really effective. And so at some point, we have our own protocol. We're probably going to get to what that is today. But what you really like to do, and I really respect this, is you want to give principles so that you can help people make the decisions when they're evaluating these protocols that came from someone else who has no understanding of your own circumstances. Similar to that book you referenced in the last series, Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, that is principles-based thinking for cooking. So in order to help you navigate training, it's important to know the principles that are involved in coming up with your training menu. What do you have to have in your toolbox? What ingredients do you have to have? What resources do you need to have available? And what adjustments do you need to make? And of course, that is completely overwhelming. And again, definitely feels like a burden. But yeah, if we can do anything throughout this series, is we want training to not feel like a burden. We want it to be really supportive for your life and really take into consideration what you're having to navigate so that you can feel like a beast. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to nerd out. How this works is we take something that sounds simple, make it sound complicated, and then we make it sound simple again. So we hope to get there on the other side of this.
It should distill down into something that's simple, hard, and effective, as we've been saying for years.
Yep.
And it will also, as we discussed on the nutrition side, be something that will require some amount of faith in order to be consistent long enough that results occur. That, just like the experience I had of not feeling good in my body while making sacrifices and empathizing with the doubt that someone might have when they're restricting or eliminating things, but they're not seeing the results yet. So you have to have a little bit of faith. And what I hope we can offer are principles based on a lot of experience and research, both as clients and coaches and lifters ourselves, that give people a clear way of differentiating between what's worth investing their time in so they get the biggest bang for their buck.
Yep. I love that.
The quote that keeps coming up back in my mind is, I don't know if he's paraphrasing it from somebody else, but I saw it from Hormozy, that something is better than nothing. Some things are better than other things, and nothing works forever. And I think that's true for programming, and why it's so confusing.
Totally.
Because at the beginning, just getting up off the couch and doing something will 100% be better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you get motivated to go do spin, or if you get motivated to do Orange Theory or whatever, yoga, Pilates, just going out for a walk outside, that will be better than nothing.
Yes.
But it won't work forever. And there are better things. So hopefully we can give people some clarity around how to make a decision that gets them the most bang for their buck for the time that they invest towards physical freedom and being a beast.
Yeah. And we definitely know that time is that one resource we don't get more of. So it's very, very important.
I think it's the unspoken biggest variable in programming that doesn't get talked about.
Yeah.
Almost ever. How much time do I have? In fact, I would say that is the first question that you need to ask yourself before you go try to implement some sort of a training program or some sort of a stimulus or stress. How much time do you have?
And usually when we're like feeling really motivated and inspired, or, when someone feels motivated to make this kind of change, they will likely create time in their schedule that may not actually exist. When in real life, you might, when it comes down to your whole calendar, you might only have 25 minutes 4 times a week when it comes down to the logistics it takes to get the family everything they need so that you can have your own time. You can get to the gym when you need to, when you have to have all the flexibility that life demands. And so, that's okay. You don't need to have 90 minutes 5 times a week, but really look at your schedule and say, and be realistic with, okay, you know what? I have 45 minutes 3 days a week. That's okay.
Well, that might be actually a great place to start. What do you think is the minimum amount of invested time that someone needs to allocate in order to invest, like I said, the minimum amount of time in their own physical freedom, in their own health?
I have seen people be very effective with as little as 45 minutes twice a week. So 90 minutes total for the week.
90 minutes total with just lifting.
Yeah.
Do you include activity outside of that, walking or just whatever physical activity they have outside of lifting?
That's a good point. It is more impactful when they're not sedentary. So when they're walking, when their step count is closer to like 8,000.
Which is typically going to be somewhere around 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour a day of some sort of just general movement.
Yeah. Like if your life is just one where you're on your feet all day, you're going to get pretty close to that, if not meet it.
True.
If not, you'll need like 1 or 2 walks in addition to it.
I think that matches up with my experience. I think it matches up with most of the recommendations that I've seen that are evidence-based, that you're going to probably need about, at a minimum, 2 resistance training sessions, to use the technical nomenclature.
2 bouts of resistance training sessions.
And somewhere around 90 minutes to 2 hours of zone 2, or like you said, if you're physically active, up to 8 to 10,000 steps, just as a rough cut. Probably something like that for your cardiovascular health. I've seen all sorts of variations of that work.
Yeah, can be spread out.
15 minutes a day, 1 lift, 2 times a week, 45 minutes, 3 times a week, 30 minutes. You can go infinitely far in the other direction as well. But if somebody wants to get the biggest bang for the buck, I think that's about the right number. 90 minutes of resistance training, or 60 to 90 minutes of resistance training once or twice, ideally twice. For some reason, once I think can work as like survival mode to hold on.
If you've invested in 2 to 3 times a week for a decent amount of time, then you can get away with once a week for an amount of time.
Like I said, something is always better than nothing. So if once is all you can do that.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to make progress, I've seen twice a week work where somebody can actually progressively overload for a sustained period of time.
And it's enough to sometimes at the least stop the backslide of, falling apart, depending on like how hard life is outside the gym. It definitely can work well to progress. And I've definitely found like as you get past the age of 35, twice a week tends to actually be really good, and then, 60 and above, like I don't even think it works well to train thrice.
A great specific example of what you were talking about at the beginning, where things have been made generic for the purpose of selling a product typically or a service, is that the traditional workout schedule for resistance training tends to be 3 days a week for a number of sets and reps that for the average person takes about an hour. Why is that? Is it because that is the optimal training program? I don't think so. I think that's because most people, when they're signing up for a gym membership, are willing and able to come in to the gym and do a thing 3 times a week for about an hour. And that's about the amount of work you can get done. If you look at some of the traditional programs, is about 7 sets in an hour with some sort of warm up and cool down.
It sells well as a private training session too. 60-minute chunk.
It's a great packaged amount of time to sell.
Yep.
People feel like they get enough value out of it. And a lot of programs are written under that overarching structure because that's how personal training originated. But as we've been able to decouple from the time constraint of being in the same gym for the same amount of time, I have found and have been able to liberate my programming structure, and more people have home gyms, honestly, as an asynchronous coach. I've found so many variations that work in terms of amount of exercises and sets and reps. But if you add it up over the week, it does still tend to get back to what you just said, an hour to 90 minutes total in order to get a full body workout. So maybe once we move past time, what's the minimum? And then we can obviously, like I said, scale up infinitely. But if you've gotten somebody convinced, okay, I can get 2 45 minutes a session, or I can get 3 30 minutes. What should I do? Like, how do I get the most out of that time spent in the gym?
You have to at first learn how to use a lot of joints, or your biggest joints, at the same time for one movement. Learn how to do that well. And then you progressively overload that movement. It's not going to take you 6 months to learn it. It's going to take you like 2 sessions. And I'm talking about the squat. I think this is not a surprise. But the principle behind that is you're trying to get a lot of work done. Work meaning muscular contraction to a degree that is a challenge where it almost overwhelms what you can do at that time. And at the beginning, especially someone who's demuscled, who has opportunity to build muscle, that movement can be pretty challenging on its own with just body weight, where you start with your feet shoulder width apart, you sit down until your hip crease gets below your knees, and then you stand yourself back up. That can be a big movement for someone just from there. And when you throw in putting a bar on your back and making that movement repeatable, you're learning how to do that. When you take time to progressively overload it, you can use so much muscle and so much of your nervous system with a relatively few amount of reps that you get so much effective work done in like 15, 20 minutes. So I think you need to learn how to move in a way that you can repeat that pattern and progressively overload it over time. That amount of time is going to be relatively short in the beginning, and then it's going to be longer and longer the more that you do it. But I think something like a squat, a bench press, and some sort of pull, deadlift, chin up, row, where you're moving your hips, your knees, your shoulders, your elbows in a big way.
For years, we've been saying we want to use the most muscle over the greatest range of motion, effective range of motion, so that we can lift the most weight. 3 criteria that have, I think, guided us well. And I would just add to that a little bit more why. Obviously, as Barbell Logic, we are a fan of barbells, but that's for the simplicity and the ability to infinitely scale them, to progressively overload. And especially now, everywhere, you can typically find a barbell. But let's go back to first principles about as to why we want to do that. And like you said, it's because we want to train our full body and recruit as many muscles to contract and generate as much mechanical tension so that we're telling the body, you are not strong enough.
Right.
We need to tell our entire body, you need to get stronger. So get to work, start building some muscle. And this is a critical point, in my opinion, as to why it needs to be heavy. It's not just about muscle. The internet is so geeked out on hypertrophy that they totally ignore and discount the other benefits of lifting heavy, blanking weight. And that is connective tissue, your ligaments, your tendons, your skeletal structure, the bone density. We all know, I'm sure, and have talked about osteoporosis. Lifting heavy weight is particularly useful and a huge return on invested time for all of those things other than just muscle mass. Yes, I love muscle mass. That's great. But there's a whole other benefit to lifting heavy. And when you do the math on what happens to your skeletal structure when you squat and the force multiplying effect that happens on your bones when you've got 400, well, it doesn't even have to be 400 pounds, whatever weight on your back, and you squat down. It could even just be a dumbbell or a goblet squat. But whatever you're carrying, whatever load you're carrying, even just your body weight, when you look at the compressive force on the bone, because of the physics and the biomechanics of how the joints move, you are using the levers of your body to multiply that weight and that load such that it's compressing the bone literally by 4 or 5 times the actual weight that you're moving, that your body is not going to feel if you're in a machine. Not to say don't do a machine. Machines are bad. It's just the first principle why I would default to a barbell first is because you're going to get more bang for your buck, which is what we started with. How do I get the most bang for my buck? I would say it's to do loaded human movement, because it's an incredibly efficient way to stress your muscles so they grow, but it's also the added benefit of the connective tissue and your skeletal structure stimulus that will also cause them to grow and become more resilient, or even just the fluid in your joints. I almost said amniotic fluid, but
yeah. I'm supposed to drink that, right? That's a supplement.
The fluid in your joints is non-Newtonian, which is interesting. That as it becomes more compressed, it actually becomes more solid, and you get benefit from compressing the joints and also putting the connective tissue under stress. I saw recently a study that a lot of joint pain is, the hypothesis of the study was that it was fluid building up in your tendons, and that by lifting heavy over a range of motion, you actually squeeze the fluid out of the joint. This is why a lot of people will report after squatting, their knees actually feel better. versus sitting in a movie theater when you have knee pain, or a flight is excruciatingly painful. So you're using your body and moving it in normal movement patterns that are good for you to practice, because you also get the added benefit of balance with many of these movements, which is a huge life skill for physical freedom, is being able to maintain balance, all from doing a very short list of exercises. And when you're deciding what exercises to use, I would challenge people to ask themselves, what can I do that allows me to move over the greatest range of motion using the most muscle mass, like you said, meaning the most number of joints are moving, so that I can lift the most weight. And that's how you're going to get the most return on your invested time. We can talk, and I'm sure this series will include all kinds of fun ways that you can modify that or add to that or supplement it to accomplish more goals outside of the core desire of minimal effective dose, if you will. But if you can answer that series of questions with something that meets those criteria, you're going to be getting a good return on your invested time.
And it's not even just that time in the moment. It's like you were actually investing into your future training, because when you, like you were saying, when you know how to do these movements, they're infinitely loadable, meaning you can go up 5 pounds, you can go down 15 pounds, depending on, what's going on with your programming at that point.
Or 1 pound. Or half a pound.
Or 1 pound, which you're going to have to do when you're pressing. You're going to have to. And you don't have that freedom to as much a degree when you're on a machine. You have limitations in range of motion, and you have limitations in how much you can load it and how much you can drive adaptation. So when you learn how to perform a squat and a deadlift and a bench press and a press, you actually are giving yourself so many options for your future programming. It's a good investment.
I will add that I'm also not so much of a zealot about barbells that if for whatever reason that option doesn't work for you, dear listener, because it's not available, because something hurts, because you're not confident with the movement, you can still apply that criteria to any other option and it will be better than nothing.
Totally.
So if a leg press is the machine that you feel confident loading, making it heavy, and you're not confident with the squat, do the leg press.
Let's go.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's do the leg press.
Do it heavy and do it at a weight somewhere between 4 to 8 reps where it feels like you're about to fail. Like you said, not all the way. Doesn't have to be grindy and you're dying, but it's got to be heavy. But I think those are the baseline criteria when you walk into a gym or you're trying to figure out what do I need to do. Make sure, and I would echo what you said, you're bending your knees, you're bending your hips, you're bending your elbows, and you're moving your shoulders. Cumulatively over that minimum 60 to 90 minutes a week. And we'll talk about how to divvy that up in more detail going forward. But
yep,
I think we hopefully have planted at least enough of a flag to minimize the overhead, the mental overhead. I don't know. Maybe we've just made people really nervous and like they have a huge 3D chess problem.
Don't worry. We're going to answer those questions. I think that's a great place to end it for today. We're going to talk more about stress, because you actually can't do this unless you know how to create the right amount of stress. And we'll talk about what that actually means, because there can be too much and there can be too little. We're going to talk about actual programming. We're going to talk about what equipment and more movements that you need to do and how to make it work with your life. So we're also going to talk about what we mean by physical freedom. We talked about it a little bit in the previous, or actually kind of a lot in the previous series, but now, like, what does that mean when you have enough physical freedom to feel very comfortable in the trade-offs you're making and the opportunities you've created for yourself? It's cool.
Yeah, I want people to be able to come away with this feeling like they have clarity on how to get that return on investment, the biggest bang for your buck, without feeling like, just like on the nutrition side, you have to white knuckle some program perfectly and stop doing all other things in your life.
Right.
I'm still going skiing 2, sometimes 3 times a week. and training and lifting. You like to add spin into your training.
Which like 6 years ago, me would have been like, no, that's stupid. That's ridiculous. You should never
That's
do
right.
that.
I would have done the same. Now, it doesn't mean I come home from the mountain and immediately go into my squat workout.
Yeah.
We'll talk about how to prioritize and make trade-offs there, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be binary.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about this one.
Me too. Awesome.
I do have an ask for the dear listener. If you have any specific questions, where can they send them?
Podcast at barbell-logic.com. Send them. See you here next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.